Steven Seagal stepped out of his black sedan and looked up at the glass and steel building in front of him. The company logo shimmered above the entrance, polished and modern, exactly the way he had approved it years ago. This wasn't a movie set. This wasn't a press event. It was just another quiet day, and Steven had decided to stop by his own company without any warning, entourage, or fanfare. He was dressed simply: dark jacket, plain shirt, no sunglasses, no bodyguards. To Steven, this place wasn't about status. It was business. He wanted to see how things were running when no one knew the boss was coming. As he walked toward the entrance, employees passed by without a second glance. Some were on their phones, others chatting, rushing to meetings. No one stopped him. No one recognized him. And Steven didn't mind. In fact, he preferred it that way. But the moment he reached the security checkpoint, everything changed. A uniformed security guard stepped forward and raised a hand. "Sir, you need to check in." Steven stopped calmly. "I'm here to see the management," he said evenly. The guard looked him up and down, clearly unimpressed. "ID." Steven hesitated for half a second. He hadn't brought any employee badge. He didn't think he needed one. After all, this was his building. "I don't have it on me," Steven replied. "But I don't need a visitor pass." The guard's expression hardened. Everyone needs clearance. Around them, people continued walking, unaware that something unusual was unfolding just a few feet away. Steven could feel the subtle shift in the air, the kind of tension that appears quietly, before anyone realizes it's there. "I own this company," Steven said calmly, not raising his voice, not trying to impress anyone. The guard let out a short, dismissive breath, almost a laugh. He'd heard excuses before. Famous ones. Creative ones. This sounded like just another man trying to bypass the rules. "Sir, if you don't have ID, you can't enter," the guard said firmly. "That's policy." Steven nodded slowly, still composed. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But he could already sense where this was heading. Behind the desk, another guard glanced over, curious. A few nearby employees slowed their steps, noticing the conversation. Steven Seagal, actor, martial artist, owner, was standing at the entrance of his own company, being treated like a stranger. And he had no idea that this simple misunderstanding was about to turn into a moment no one in that building would ever forget. Steven Seagal stood quietly as the security guard waited for a response, his hand resting near the radio on his belt. The guard's posture wasn't aggressive yet, but it was firm, trained, procedural, and dismissive in a way that suggested this conversation was already over in his mind. "Sir," the guard repeated, "if you don't have an ID badge or an appointment, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Steven took a slow breath. Years of discipline had taught him when to speak and when to stay silent. "I understand your job," he said calmly. "But I don't need an appointment. I'm here for internal matters." The guard frowned. "Internal matters?" he echoed, skeptical. "That's not how this works." Steven glanced around. The lobby was clean and professional, exactly how he wanted it. Employees walked past, some slowing down, others pretending not to stare. A few whispered to each other, sensing tension but unsure of its cause. Steven noticed how quickly people avoided eye contact when authority was involved. "I don't want to make this difficult," Steven said. "You can call upstairs. They'll confirm." The guard shook his head. "Sir, everyone says that." That was when the tone changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough for Steven to recognize it. The guard wasn't listening anymore. He had already decided who Steven was, just another man trying to bend the rules. A second guard approached, older, more rigid. "What's the problem?" he asked. "This guy won't show ID," the first guard said. "Claims he owns the place." The second guard raised an eyebrow and looked Stephen over from head to toe. No suit. No badge. No visible authority. Just a calm man standing his ground. "Sir," the second guard said, "you need to leave the secured area." Stephen didn't move. "I'm not in a secured area yet," he replied evenly. That answer only irritated them more. "You're being uncooperative," the first guard said sharply. "Step away from the entrance." Stephen could feel eyes on him now. Phones subtly raised. Employees pausing longer than necessary. The situation was no longer private. It was becoming a public test of control. Stephen knew he could end this in seconds. One phone call. One name. One confirmation. But something stopped him. He wanted to see how far this would go. Not out of ego, but out of principle. "How would you treat me," Stephen asked calmly, "if I looked different?" The guards exchanged a glance. "Sir, don't make this about something it's not," the second guard said. But it already was. Stephen's voice remained steady. "I'm cooperating. I'm not raising my voice. I'm not resisting. I'm simply telling you the truth." The first guard crossed his arms. "Truth doesn't matter without proof." That sentence landed heavier than the guard realized. Around them, the lobby felt tighter. Conversations stopped. The air grew tense. This wasn't just about ID anymore. It was about authority versus respect. Stephen nodded slowly. "Then call your supervisor." "We don't need to," the guard replied. "If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll escort you out." That was the moment Stephen realized how easily power could be misused, not with violence, but with certainty. The guards believed they were right, and that belief made them deaf to reason. Stephen took a step back, not in fear, but in control. "Do what you think is necessary," he said. The guards exchanged another look, unsure whether they were winning or losing control, and the lobby waited. Have you ever seen someone treated unfairly just because they didn't look important? Tell us in the comments, what city and country are you watching this from? The silence in the lobby felt heavier than noise. Steven Seagal stood a few steps back from the security desk, hands relaxed at his sides, posture calm but unyielding. The guards, however, had shifted. What began as a routine check had turned into a standoff, and now neither side wanted to be the one to lose control. The older guard spoke into his radio in a low voice. "Possible unauthorized individual at the main entrance. Refusing to leave." Stephen noticed the wording. Possible. Unauthorized. Labels that carried weight without proof. Within moments, 2 more guards appeared from the side corridor. Their arrival changed everything. Employees who had been pretending not to watch now openly stopped. Some leaned against pillars. Others pulled out their phones, pretending to check messages while clearly recording. "Sir," one of the new guards said, taking a position slightly to Stephen's left, "we're asking you one last time to leave the premises." Stephen looked at him calmly. "I've asked you to verify who I am. You've refused." "That's not our responsibility," the guard replied. "Compliance is." Stephen nodded slowly. "Then you're not protecting this company," he said quietly. "You're protecting procedure." That line caught the attention of a few employees nearby. A woman near the elevators frowned. A man in a suit whispered something to his colleague. The energy in the room shifted again, not toward anger, but discomfort. The first guard stepped forward. "Sir, you're causing a disruption." "I'm standing still," Stephen replied. "You're escalating." For a brief moment, no one spoke. The guards were trained for resistance, shouting, threats. They weren't trained for calm. One of them reached out, not forcefully, but deliberately, aiming to guide Stephen away from the entrance. Stephen didn't resist, but he didn't move either. He simply looked at the guard's hand, then back at his face. "Don't touch me," Stephen said, his voice still low, still controlled. The guard pulled his hand back, unsure. The lobby felt like it was holding its breath. At that moment, a young employee finally spoke up. "Shouldn't we call someone from management?" The guards ignored her. Stephen turned slightly toward the crowd, not theatrically, not seeking sympathy. "This is what happens," he said calmly, "when authority stops listening." That did it. One guard stiffened. "Sir, if you continue speaking, we will remove you." Stephen smiled faintly, not amused, but aware. "You already decided that before I said a word." Phones were fully raised now. No one was hiding it anymore. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was becoming a spectacle. The guards whispered among themselves. They were losing control of the narrative. Removing him would look bad. Letting him stay would look weak. Stephen waited. He had all the time in the world. Finally, the older guard said, "Escort him outside." 2 guards stepped closer. And that was when Stephen spoke again, not louder, but firmer. "Before you do," he said, "ask yourself one thing. If I looked powerful to you, would this be happening?" That question landed like a crack in glass. No one answered. The guards hesitated. Employees stared. The lobby, moments ago just another workplace, had become a mirror, reflecting how quickly assumptions turn into actions. Steven Seagal stood there, calm, dignified, and unmoving. And somewhere upstairs, the truth was seconds away from crashing into the situation. If you were in Steven's place right now, what would you do? Would you stay calm, or would you demand respect immediately? Comment below and tell us your choice. The guards paused, their formation tightening but their confidence wavering. Steven Seagal stood exactly where he was, not blocking anyone, not raising his voice, not making threats. Yet somehow, his calm presence felt more disruptive to them than shouting ever could. "Sir," the older guard said again, slower this time, "we're trying to resolve this peacefully." Stephen met his eyes. "So am I." That answer didn't sit well. Peace, in their definition, meant compliance. And Stephen was refusing to give them that, not by force, but by dignity. One of the guards glanced toward the elevators, clearly hoping someone from management would step out and end this. No such luck. The elevator doors opened and closed, indifferent to the tension in the lobby. A few employees had gathered closer now. Whispers moved through the crowd like static. "Who is he? Why won't they just check? This is getting uncomfortable." Stephen heard it all, but his focus stayed on the guards. He knew this moment well, not from movies, not from fights, but from real life. The moment when authority realizes it may be wrong, but pride refuses to step aside. The first guard adjusted his belt and said, "You're putting us in a difficult position." Stephen nodded. "You put yourselves there when you stopped listening." That struck harder than any insult. The guard's jaw tightened. "We don't have to listen to excuses." Stephen took a slow step forward, not toward the exit, but toward the desk. Instantly, the guard stiffened. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Stephen said evenly. "I'm asking for basic verification." "Verification happens after compliance," the guard snapped. Stephen's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in clarity. "That's backwards." The crowd reacted subtly, a shift of weight, a collective inhale. People were no longer just watching, they were judging. A woman near the reception desk finally spoke louder. "This doesn't feel right." The guards ignored her, but they couldn't ignore the room anymore. Authority depends on perception, and that perception was cracking. The older guard lifted his radio again. "We may need assistance at the main entrance." Stephen smiled faintly. "More people won't make you more correct." That comment landed hard. The guard lowered the radio, visibly frustrated. "Sir, Last warning. Stephen tilted his head slightly. And then what? Silence. The guards had reached the edge of their script. Remove him, and it could look bad. Let him stay, and it would undermine their authority. Every second that passed made their position weaker. Stephen could feel the momentum shifting, not in his favor yet, but away from theirs. He spoke again, voice steady, carrying just enough to reach the onlookers. This company was built on discipline, respect, and accountability. A few employees exchanged glances. That wasn't something a random visitor would say. The guards noticed it too. "Sir," the first guard said cautiously now, "how do you know that?" Stephen didn't answer immediately. He looked around the lobby, the polished floors, the carefully chosen artwork, the layout he remembered approving years ago. "Because I demanded it," he said simply. That was the moment doubt crept in. Not certainty. Not recognition. Just doubt. The guards looked at each other, uncertainty replacing irritation. One of them took a step back, not retreating, but recalculating. Stephen didn't press. He didn't say his name. He didn't claim his title. He let the silence work. And in that silence, the reality they had been avoiding began to surface. Whatever this situation was, it was no longer under their control. And somewhere above them, someone who truly knew who Steven Seagal was about to walk into the lobby. The silence in the lobby stretched longer than anyone expected. The guards stood in place, no longer advancing, no longer confident enough to force the situation. Steven Seagal remained calm, his presence steady, as if he knew something they didn't. Then the elevator doors opened. A man in his early 40s stepped out, dressed sharply, phone pressed to his ear. He was clearly in a hurry, speaking in a low, urgent tone as he walked toward the reception desk. At first, he didn't notice the crowd. Then he did. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes locked onto Stephen. The color drained from his face. The man ended the call instantly and took 2 quick steps forward. "Stephen," he said, disbelief mixed with panic. Every head in the lobby turned. Stephen looked at him and nodded slightly. "Good morning." The man froze for half a second, then straightened up and said loudly, "Sir, I didn't know you were coming in today." The effect was immediate. The guards stiffened. "Sir," the first guard repeated quietly. The man turned to them, confusion and concern written all over his face. "Why is Mr. Seagal standing here?" No one answered. One of the guards finally spoke, his voice suddenly unsure. He didn't have identification." The man stared at him, stunned. "Identification," he repeated. Then it hit him. His eyes widened. "You do realize you're talking to the owner of this company?" The lobby went dead silent. Phones froze mid-air. Whispers stopped. Even the air felt heavier. The guards' faces changed instantly. Shock, disbelief, and then pure embarrassment. One of them took a step back without realizing it. Another swallowed hard. "The owner," someone whispered from the crowd. The man nodded firmly. "Steven Seagal founded this company." For a moment, no one moved. Then the apologies came rushing in. "Sir, we didn't know. There must have been a misunderstanding. We were just following protocol." Stephen raised a hand gently, stopping them. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smiling either. "I know you were doing your jobs," he said calmly. "That only made it worse." The guards looked at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. One of them muttered a quiet apology. Another removed his cap, rubbing the back of his neck. The man from management looked deeply uncomfortable. "This should never have happened," he said. "I'm extremely sorry, Stephen." Stephen glanced around at the employees watching, then back at the guards. "This isn't about me," he said. It's about how easily respect disappears when assumptions take over. No one argued. The guards nodded silently. They had gone from authority to accountability in less than a minute. Stephen stepped past the security desk and walked into the lobby proper, not triumphantly, not arrogantly. Just normally. Like someone who belonged there. Employees parted instinctively to make space. Some looked ashamed. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked inspired. The man from management walked beside him. "If you'd like, we can." Stephen shook his head. "Later." He stopped and turned back to the guards. They straightened immediately. "Remember this," Stephen said calmly. "Power isn't proven by control. It's proven by judgment." The guards nodded, deeply aware that this moment would stay with them far longer than any training session. As Stephen walked toward the elevators, the lobby slowly returned to motion, but nothing felt the same anymore. The truth had come out. And with it, a lesson no one in that building would forget. The lobby didn't return to normal right away. Even after Steven Seagal disappeared into the elevator, the atmosphere remained tense, heavy with realization. People stood frozen for a few seconds longer, as if the building itself needed time to process what had just happened. The guards were the first to move, but not confidently. Their posture had completely changed. Shoulders lowered. Voices quiet. The authority they had projected minutes earlier was gone, replaced by visible regret. The older guard finally spoke. "We messed up." No one disagreed. The manager who had recognized Stephen turned sharply toward the security team. His voice was controlled, but disappointment cut through every word. This situation should never have reached that point. Verification exists for a reason. "We were following protocol," one guard said weakly. "Protocol doesn't replace judgment," the manager replied. "And it definitely doesn't replace respect." That sentence echoed. Employees nearby nodded subtly. A few exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. What they had witnessed wasn't just a mistake, it was a failure of awareness. One guard ran a hand down his face. "He never raised his voice," he said quietly. "We did." Another added, "He didn't threaten us. He didn't even argue." That realization hurt the most. The manager took a breath. "This will be reviewed," he said. "All of it." The word reviewed landed heavily. Consequences were coming, not dramatic firings, not public humiliation, but something deeper, accountability. Meanwhile, upstairs, Stephen stood in a quiet conference room, looking out through a wall of glass. The city stretched below, busy and indifferent. He could have demanded apologies. He could have made phone calls. He could have turned the moment into a display of power. He chose none of it. When the manager entered the room, Stephen turned calmly. "I don't want anyone punished for ego," he said. "I want them trained to think." The manager nodded, clearly relieved and humbled. "Understood." Back in the lobby, the guards were instructed to step aside while senior security staff reviewed camera footage. Watching themselves on screen was uncomfortable. Every crossed arm, every dismissive glance, every moment they chose authority over understanding. No one laughed. No one defended it. One guard shook his head slowly. "We judged him before he spoke." That sentence summed it all up. Employees who had recorded the incident began uploading clips. Not sensationalized. Not edited. Just raw footage of a calm man being doubted in his own building. Within minutes, messages began appearing online. "Is that Steven Seagal? Why is security treating him like that? He handled that with serious class." The narrative formed quickly, and it wasn't kind to the guards. But Stephen never commented. When he returned to the lobby later, the guards stood straighter than before, not out of fear, but awareness. One of them stepped forward. "Sir," he said, sincere and direct. "I owe you an apology." Stephen nodded. "Accepted. No lecture. No speech. Just accountability." The manager watched quietly, understanding something important. Respect wasn't enforced today, it was earned. As Stephen walked out of the building later that afternoon, the guards watched him leave. Not as a problem. Not as a threat. As a reminder. A reminder that real authority doesn't come from uniforms or rules alone, but from the ability to recognize truth before pride gets in the way. And for the security team, that lesson came with instant regret they wouldn't soon forget. By the time Steven Seagal had left the building, the incident had already begun to spread. Employees who had recorded the encounter discreetly on their phones began sharing the footage, first internally, then externally. Within minutes, snippets appeared online, on social media platforms, in group chats, and eventually on news outlets. The story was simple yet compelling. The legendary actor and company owner being doubted and challenged in his own building, remaining calm and dignified throughout, while security and employees realized their mistake. Comments and shares multiplied quickly. People were stunned. "Can you believe this happened?" wrote one user, adding a clip of Stephen standing calmly as guards argued with him. Another said, "This is a lesson in humility, for everyone, not just security guards." Views skyrocketed. Retweets, reposts, and reactions flooded in. The video was relatable on many levels: respect, authority, humility, and how people respond under pressure. As more people watched, the story became a discussion topic globally. Media outlets picked it up. Headlines ranged from "Steven Seagal stands his ground in own company" to "Security mistakes owner for stranger. Immediate humiliation ensues." Fans of Seagal praised his composure, while viewers unfamiliar with him were impressed by his ability to manage the situation without anger or arrogance. The footage showed a man who could have demanded apologies or exerted power, but instead chose patience and integrity. That choice resonated. Meanwhile, inside the company, the aftermath continued. Security procedures were reviewed immediately. Guards who had been embarrassed were given additional training, not punishment, but education. The incident became a reference point for how to treat visitors and employees alike, reinforcing that assumptions based solely on appearance or status could lead to mistakes. Conversations across departments focused on awareness, judgment, and the subtle nuances of authority. For Stephen, the impact of the incident was less about viral fame and more about reinforcing a personal philosophy he had long practiced: dignity, patience, and letting truth reveal itself. He had walked in quietly, been challenged unfairly, and left a lasting impression, without raising his voice or escalating the situation unnecessarily. That demonstration of calm authority left a mark on everyone who witnessed it, whether in person or online. The story quickly became a lesson in leadership and respect. People shared their own experiences in comments, comparing situations where assumptions had caused conflict. Some viewers admitted that they too had misjudged others based on appearances or titles. Others reflected on how they had reacted under pressure, praising the idea that patience and composure could turn an uncomfortable situation into a lesson for everyone involved. And then came the final, compelling part of the narrative: the call to action. Content creators, news anchors, and influencers emphasized the lesson Stephen had shown. Real authority is measured not by how loudly you assert it, but by how gracefully you handle challenges, even when underestimated. Viewers were encouraged to reflect, comment, and engage. They were asked to share their own stories, to think critically about assumptions, and to appreciate the value of calm and confident decision-making. The momentum didn't stop. Online engagement surged. Videos were reposted, analyzed, and turned into discussion threads. People tagged friends, family, and colleagues. The incident became more than a viral video. It became a conversation about respect, humility, and leadership. If you believe that respect should come from character, not appearances, smash that like button, type "respect" in the comments, and subscribe for more incredible real-life stories where calm, dignity, and quick thinking triumph over assumptions and mistakes. Share this story to remind others that true authority is earned, not assumed, and that patience and integrity always make the difference. The legacy of that quiet moment in the lobby, the one where Steven Seagal simply stood, waited, and let the truth reveal itself, would continue to inspire people online and offline for weeks, months, and years to come.